Good morning, everyone. So, officially, welcome to our free webinar for April. And for this April, we do another HR spotlight, but this time on understanding consulting. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about consulting. Maybe you've had personal experience from your own organizations hiring external consultants. So, for today, let's talk more about that. What is consulting? And more specifically, how does that apply to us as HR people? To introduce myself a bit, especially for the ones who are new here today, I'm Elisha Corpus. You can call me Elisha. Di na kailangan ma'am or whatever. Just call me by my name. And what I do is I'm a management consultant. That all really started for me because after undergrad in UP Diliman, I went to take my master's in the US. I went to Michigan State University and I did my master's in human resources and labor relations. Over there, they gave us a lot of learnings on frameworks, theories, models that we can use to really understand organizations. For me, that was very helpful because that kick-started a career in consulting that I was able to bring forward until now that I'm in the Philippines. Right after my master's in Michigan State, I worked in Microsoft in their headquarters. So I moved to Seattle, Washington. I worked in Microsoft's global learning and development team, delivering and strategizing learning and development opportunities for 130,000 people all around the world. In Microsoft, of course, I was a full time employee, but we consider ourselves as internal consultants. That's because our role in learning and development required us to partner with different parts of the company so that we can diagnose their learning needs, deliver those interventions, and of course, maintain and track the sustainability of those interventions. This concept of internal consulting is something that I hope we can dig into today. So that's the quick background on my work experience before coming back to the Philippines. In late 2018, I came back to the Philippines and I started working here as a consultant. I'm an external consultant, which means that organizations hire me for different projects and engagements depending on a specific need that they are looking for. My consulting firm here in the Philippines is just creatively called Elisha Corpus Consulting. So pangalan ko lang. And what I specialize in are cultural transformation, leadership development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I work with different organizations from very small companies to multinational companies and their different offices all around the world. Like what I mentioned earlier, we do these free webinars because we learn a lot as we do different kinds of work with different clients. So, what we hope is that every month we can come in here to share some of those knowledge and skills with you. With that, that's me. I hope to get to know more of you as we go through our session. Marami sa inyo laging sumasali, so very familiar na yung mga pangalan, and it's great to feel like we have this little community going on. All right, so for today specifically, what are we going to do? Number one, let's define consulting and specifically internal consulting. Number two, let's discuss why we need to understand consulting as HR professionals. Bakit nga ba importante to in the first place? Kahit na full-time naman tayong employees sa organizations natin, why should we look at consulting skills as part of growing our HR skill? And then, of course, the third goal of our webinar this morning is to identify relevant actions that we can do now to build our internal consulting skill. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of intentionality to become internal consultants. But what we can do is to start with some actions that we can integrate into our current roles, whatever role that may be. So these are the things that we will do from now until 11:30. All right, to kick off our interactions and to start getting you warmed up, let's see here. Let's do a quick survey. Have you experienced working with a consultant? Give a thumbs up reaction, or you can comment yes or no, whatever's easiest for you. Ayan, so let's see. Give a thumbs up or give her any reaction of any kind. All right. I see some people are starting to use their reaction buttons. That's great. Feel free to also comment if comment is easier for you. Okay. So parang merong konti that experienced it already, and then I see one person who said they haven't yet experienced that. So great. Thank you so much for giving me your answers there. Not yet and yes. Okay. So we have different experiences that we're coming from, right? Which I think is great because then we can all learn from each other as we go through today. All right, great, everyone. Thanks for letting me know. So I see a lot of people saying not yet or no. That means this is a great introduction for you. For the ones who said yes, maybe take this as a refresher, and hopefully this is something you can use to apply it into your current roles. Sige. So next, let me ask all of you, whether you've worked with a consultant or not yet, what does a consultant do? Pagkakaalam nyo na ginagawa ng isang consultant. Ano bang trabaho niya? Anong ginagawa niya sa isang kumpanya kapag hina-hire siya? Maybe share that with me in one phrase or one sentence in the chat. All right, I see some people starting to answer. I'll give everyone a few minutes to write their answers there. Okay, so far people are saying to help. They provide guidance, any sort of guidance. They share expertise on a specific issue or competency. Yep. They advise the client in best practices, legalities, etc. They guide, they advise, and guide. All right. Common theme so far is advising, guiding, helping. They deliver services, yes. So very operationalized definition, right? A consultant is someone who gives a service of some kind to the company. So guidance, another person said guidance. Okay. So let's see the definition of consulting or a consultant. This definition is from a book called Flawless Consulting by Peter Block. So this book is actually, as you can see from the cover, medyo luma na siya, diba? And that's because it's one of those classic books that a lot of people still refer to until now. So we will use this book heavily because Flawless Consulting by Peter Block is one of the most reliable, comprehensive resources on consulting. Okay, so let's see how Peter Block defined consultant. A consultant is a person in a position to have some influence over an individual, a group, or an organization, but who has no direct power to make changes or to implement programs. Again, it's a person who has some influence, but the key word to remember here is they do not have the direct power to make those changes or to implement new programs. Let's take me, for example. I'm a consultant, and for the most part, I'm an external consultant. When a manager hires me, for example, Because of some expertise that I bring to the table, that manager could listen to me. I may have some influence over that leader, but ultimately, I don't have the power to make decisions. It's up to that manager whether they will want to take the advice or not. That's why I have no direct power to make changes or to implement programs in that organization. The interesting thing to think about here is being a consultant, it didn't say what role or what kind of consultant you have to be. So, something to think about is that you may be doing consulting even if you're not called a consultant. Again, pwedeng nagko-consulting ka na at nag-a-apply ka na ng consulting skills kahit na yung role mo ay hindi consultant. Let's talk about that. For HR professionals, for example, a lot of us don't have titles as consultants, di ba? Usually, ang title ng mga HR, maybe HR business partner, HR BP, pwedeng HR generalist, or HR officer, HR specialist, etc., etc. Hindi naman tinatawag na consultant usually ang mga HR. But because HR people are providing guidance, assistance, help to the leaders of the organization, then you could consider yourselves as having that consulting skill, even if you are not called a consultant. Yun yung sana maintindihan natin, na kahit na ang role ninyo ay HR, ina-apply nyo pa rin yung skill of consulting whenever you try to diagnose a problem, you try to implement an intervention, and you try to sustain that intervention. A consultant is anyone with a client. We do consulting with our clients. That's why you have to think about it in this way. Who are your clients as HR people in your own organizations? Sino ba yung mga tao na pwede niyong i-consider na clients niyo? A client is a person or persons that the consultant wants to influence without exercising direct control over them. We call this sometimes as influencing without authority. Influencing without authority because, again, we don't have direct control over these people. Siguro minsan as HR, hindi ka pa, mas mataas pa sa'yo yung ina-advise mo na leader, di ba? Or yes, tama yung comment sa chat. We can also be consultants to employees. And most of the time, these employees that we can see as our clients don't really report to us. Diba? Tayo yung pinupuntahan nila, pero wala tayong direct control over them, their salary, their benefits, etc. Because ultimately, it's their managers who have a more direct control over them. So again, ang gusto nating matutunan is to shift our mindset to think that yes, we are doing consulting even if our roles are in HR and not exactly called a consultant. The objective of the consultant is to engage in successful actions that result in people or organizations managing themselves differently. Again, if we look at this definition of a consultant's objective, we can see that the important thing to happen is change. Kailangan nagkakaroon ng pagbabago based on dun sa ginawa ng consultant na yun. What kind of change can we think about here? For consultants, we can think of change in two different ways. First, it can be change in the structural, policy, or procedural sense. For example, if that consultant or that HR person's job is to reorg the company, nagbago ang hierarchies, magbago ng structures, maybe their job is to create a new performance management program with a different process compared to what it was before. That means the change was more structural, policy, or procedural based in nature. The next kind of change is more around the end result of people learning something new. So maybe this is a new behavior that they're going to apply in their everyday work because of the new knowledge or the new skill that that consultant tried to impart. For example, this can be new norms that the team will learn. It could be new communication or leadership skills, even that an individual could apply moving forward. So again, may dalawang kinds of change na kailangan maging goal ng isang consultant to create in that organization, team, or individual. The objective is to create that transformation because that's why you're a consultant in the first place. Merong need, may challenge or may concern yung grupo na yon, and kailangan nila ng assistance to see through that challenge so they can get to a better place in the future. So now that we've talked about that change is the objective of a consultant, what do you think? What kinds of changes do we try to influence in our organizations? So maybe think about your role as HR. What kinds of changes are you trying to implement or to influence? So I love the comment there in the chat, right? So talent acquisition people who are in HR, they are also internal consultants because they advise the talent in terms of what should the hiring managers look for. So yes, maybe let's take that as a kind of change, right? The talent acquisition person has insight into how the market is changing. Nagbabago ba ang mga rates ng mga tao na gusto nyo i-hire? So pwede mong i-advise yung kumpanya tungkol dun sa mga pagbabago na yon. And then from there, they can change some sort of process or policy on who or what kind of level of people they will hire. So great example. Yep. Other examples of changes you mentioned in the chat are performance management processes, right implementation of due process. Tama naman, di ba? Lalo na kung may legal side yung mga proseso na yan. Think about labor relations under HR, for example. A lot of the work under labor relations relates to having due process with how you deal with conflicts that arise. Revising or preparing HR policies, very good, because those are the policies that become the basis of future decisions that you will have to make as HR. Other changes, talent development, compensation, benefits, administration, employee relations, retention programs, HR manuals, policies, processes, etc. So great job, everyone. These are all the kinds of changes that we want to influence in our organizations. As HR people, ito yung mga trabaho na usually napupunta sa atin, di ba? So now, let's talk about the internal consultant. We've already established that as HR people, we are actually doing consulting. Now, we call that a specific term. People who are employees, you're employed full-time but by that organization, But if you're doing work that's involved in consulting to make a certain change happen, then you can call yourselves an internal consultant. An internal consultant is an employee of the organization whose role is to help the organization improve. Take note here that it's not just HR people who can be considered internal consultants. Let's say, for example, if you're in marketing and if as a marketing person, you're advising other people in the company on how to best strategize their communication campaigns. So then you're becoming an internal consultant for marketing in your company. So again, it's not just boxed into HR people. An internal consultant is anyone who is already a full-time employee of that company, but who is doing something to help that organization improve. Internal consultants, they work from the company itself. They can collaborate with different departments like HR or quality control. They focus on areas that employer and staff will have to be influenced by. You might be asking yourselves, right? So, what is the benefit of using an internal consultant versus an external consultant? Dahil may options ang isang kumpanya, it's good to think about when would it be beneficial to choose one over the other. So it's useful to use an internal consultant, someone already in your company, if you want someone with familiarity with the company's policies, operations, and people. As you can imagine, external consultants like me, when I start working with the company, I have to take some time to understand the uniqueness of the policies, the operations, and the people of that company. Versus an internal consultant will already have that familiarity. Kilala na niya kung sino yung mga kailangan niyang maka-network para makuha yung mga sagot na kailangan to address the problem. An internal consultant will have knowledge and first-hand experience of the company culture. Dahil naka-embed sila dun sa kumpanya, alam nila kung ano ba yung ugali ng mga tao. Alam nila kung ano ba ang values and beliefs na pinapaniwalaan ng mga tao. Is it a hierarchical organization where people value respect and level? Is it a more egalitarian or more equal organization na pangalan lang ang tawag ng mga tao, walang ma'am o sir, dahil yun ang gusto nilang kind of culture. So when you're an internal consultant, these are things you already know and you can use to your advantage. You can use that knowledge of culture to be able to address and target the concerns that you're starting to observe. Ang maganda pa kung internal consultant ka ay baka naranasan mo na rin personally yung mga challenge or concern. That's why you will have a better understanding of what they may be. And then, of course, when you utilize an internal consultant, you can avoid the potential financial burden of hiring an external consultant. Medyo costly to get external consultants because, of course, you're using their specific expertise. That's why it's also useful to build up the internal consulting skills of people you already currently have. Kung ang HR ninyo ay marunong naman maging consultant at kaya nila yon i-deliver, they have the expertise. Mas makakatipid yung organization at the end of the day and magiging mas maganda and mas madali yung sustainability of that change because they can already build in mechanisms to pass that knowledge on to whoever their next person may be. So again, one of the most realistic benefits of utilizing an internal consultant is you can avoid the financial burden of getting someone from the outside. So now we have to ask ourselves, kung maraming benefits ang paggamit ng isang internal consultant, when does it make sense to get an external consultant? Kailan magiging maganda na mag-hire ng ibang tao outside of the organization? First, if special expertise is needed. External consultants like me, what we do is we really try to build up a niche expertise, because as we gain deep and broad knowledge on that expertise, that's the kind of value that we bring to the table when organizations choose to hire us. Because we have time to do that, we're not full-time employees of any specific company, kaya namin nabibuild yung specific expertise. So if that specific expertise is needed, that's the only time it makes sense for a company to hire an external consultant. It also makes sense to hire an external consultant if a third-party perspective is beneficial. Lalo na kung medyo political yung mga nangyayari dun sa kumpanya. So imagine, kapag yung leaders mismo ay hindi nagkakaintindihan or meron silang interpersonal conflicts that stop them from actually working together, then it's beneficial to have someone from outside of the company. Dahil outsider kami, hindi naman kami takot to point out these conflicts. We are able to take that risk because we are in a position where our jobs are not exactly dependent on those leaders or on those people. So when you have those kinds of concerns where someone from outside the company would be more valuable, then that's when it makes sense to get an external consultant. It also makes sense to get an external consultant if you want to learn about standards and ways of operating that other companies may do. Because as external consultants, we work with many different kinds of organizations. So we can have that benchmark data that we can share with the clients that we work with. So again, ito yung tatlong possible reasons that would make it useful to have someone from the outside. The thing to note though is that for most problems and concerns, especially sa mga everyday problems, you may not have access to an external consultant. Hindi ganun kabilis ang pag-hire at pagkuha someone from the outside. That's why as HR professionals, we have to have internal consulting skills so that we can deal with those everyday problems and concerns that may arise. As HR professionals, we are the internal consultants for any people-related concern in the organization. Sa'yo sila tumatakbo, kaya dapat nabibuild up natin yung skill na yun. So now, let's dig into HR as internal consultants. Bakit nga ba importante na alam natin yung skill na ito? If you were in our webinar I think it was last February. Yes. If you were in the February webinar about HR skills, we gave some research and some statistics on the current state of HR and where researchers see our field heading. According to Josh Burson, one of the management consultants that consult with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. He says that companies that have best-in-class HR functions are 5.5 times more likely to be more profitable than peers in the industry. They are also 6 times more likely to be more innovative. What they're saying here is when you build up your HR function to be at par with the best in class, then that's 5.5 times more likely to help your company be more profitable and 6 times more likely to help your company be more innovative. All right. So now the question is, how can we be best in class HR departments? So we can be best in class HR departments by targeting to be that level 4 kind of HR in terms of the HR maturity model by Josh Bersin. Let's go through these 4 different levels of the maturity model. First is transactional or compliance, meaning you can see your HR operating as a sort of cost center. They just try to figure out how to deliver the most essential functions at the lowest possible cost. For example, they try to see paano ba pinaka-mura yung makukuha nating labor force. Ano yung pwede nating magawa para yung mga tanong ng mga tao sa company, hindi na natin kailangan i-personalize yung sagot. Mas mura, mas maganda. Because ultimately, all we have to think about is compliance. According to their research, 39% of HR departments all around the world, or a majority of the people or HR departments that they've surveyed, they are still in this transactional or compliance stage. The next stage of the maturity model is efficient service delivery. This is where we see that HR is operating like a support function. Yes, you're starting to partner with different departments or different groups, starting to provide them the services that they need, but still, HR is treated like a support function. Hindi siya strategic partner per se that has influence over decisions that are happening. So according to this research, that's 29% of HR departments all around the world that we can find in level 2. Going one up, level 3 is your solution-centric HR department. These departments operate like a product organization, meaning they come up with solutions that are packaged products, but they focus too much on that product versus they may not necessarily understand the actual need. I'll give you an example because it gets a little bit confusing. In this level 3, maybe a leader will say, kailangan natin ng isang training curriculum for our middle level managers. So then, because HR is a product organization, they just come up with that. Magagawa nila at madedeliver nila excellently yung hinihingi na training program. But that's not the kind of skill that will push you up to level 4. Because what we want is for HR to actually have a consulting kind of relationship with different organizations and departments. In that scenario, if you were in level 4 or the highest level of maturity, instead of just following the order of that leader, HR will say, teka muna, let's take a step back. Paano mo nasabi na ang kailangan ng mga middle-level managers ay training. What are some instances that led you to believe the training will be the most useful intervention? What outcomes are you looking for? Ano ba yung behavior na gusto mong mabuild ng mga manager na ito na sinasabi mong kailangan ng training? So that's the kind of skill that we want to see in a level 4 HR department. Level 4 is systemic and problem-oriented. This is where HR is operating like a consulting firm. They are true internal consultants who diagnose the concerns of the organization, who strategize and implement interventions, and also who make sure that those interventions are maintained and sustained in the future. According to the research, that's only 11% of HR departments all around the world. So, very konti pa lang ang mga HR departments sa mundo na nakakarating na sa ganong skill level. As you can see here, this is why it's so important for us to start building up those internal consulting skills so that eventually our HR departments could hopefully get to that level. Now, in your opinion, based on your observation of HR in your organizations or kahit sa ibang kumpanya, what do you think does HR need to do to get to a level of operating like a consulting firm? Meron ba kayong mga naiisip na behaviors or skill gaps that need to be addressed para as HR people, we can get to that level 4 of being true internal consultants? All right, and while you're putting your answers in the chat, I just want to read out one of the comments shared here in the chat. So yung isang suggestion, yes, retainer arrangements could also help offset the disadvantage of having external consultants to some extent of higher costs and slow onboarding. So tama naman, di ba? May ibang consultants na external na retainer yung arrangement nila, meaning it's not exactly by depending on the specific project. This person is someone they can call on whenever they would need that certain expertise or concern. The thing though is the retainer arrangement really depends on the consultant that you hire. Some external consultants, mas mahal pa kung retainer versus project-based. So it depends, right? But yeah, good thing to point that out. All right, everyone, let's get back to our question here. Other than analytical skills that was already shared in the chat, what other skills or maybe think about knowledge gaps that you think HR will need to get to a higher level of operating like a consulting firm? Anong ideas nyo? All right. Some people said org development, systems thinking, business acumen. This next comment I think is really good as well. So you need the clout or support from top management, because no matter how much potential the team has, but if there's no support from management, you won't get far. Exactly. So developing that influence with your leaders is very, very important. No matter how good you are as an HR person, if they don't believe you, then it's not going to make sense, right? All right, so also getting support from management, right, in terms of the resources that you can use. Part of that internal consulting skill is being able to be clear about what resources are needed to make your suggested interventions happen. So when we're clear about that support needed, that's something that can help with the influence that we have over them. So great job, everyone. These are all really good answers in terms of what HR needs to do to get to that level. To be effective internal consultants, HR must be trusted partners of the organization's leaders. Everything you just mentioned, we can pull that into this concept of being a trusted partner. So now, let's talk about what is a trusted partner. Being a trusted partner means that number one, we are engaging in a two-way relationship with our client. We know that we do not have direct control over them. But when we build a two-way relationship, we can gain some influence and credibility because of that trusting interaction that we have. When you're a trusted partner, you can see the big picture. You're not just taking orders and looking at the small tasks or projects given to you. To be a trusted partner means that you look at the system as a whole. You apply this sort of systemic thinking so you can see how the concern or problem is related to the other parts of the organization that you are in. When we are a trusted partner, it means we acknowledge the long and the short-term realities and goals. To gain credibility with our leaders, we have to show that we have an understanding of what's currently happening and the possible future things that may happen. That's why having a good handle over data and analytics, that's very important. Understanding data will allow us to really look at what's currently happening, have some sort of scientific and data-backed basis on our recommendations, and also forecast how our suggested interventions could impact the organization in the future. That's why it's so important to have that capability to do long and short-term thinking. When we are a trusted partner, it means we have enough business acumen to understand the organization's products, services, and customers. As HR people, we don't just know HR. Kailangan naiintindihan natin paano ba kumikita ang kumpanya namin. Kung taghirap yung company natin this month, bakit? Sa supply chain ba yung problema? May problema ba tayo sa suppliers? Sa marketing ba ang problema? Hindi natin natatarget yung tamang audience na bibili at gagamit ng produkto or ng service natin? Kailangan naiintindihan natin yung mga bagay na yun because that will allow us to see the organization as a whole. Next, to be a trusted partner means we use data to understand current trends and forecast possible scenarios resulting from our interventions. It's related to number 3, but I think using data and calling that out as a specific skill is so important. Lalo na these days that we actually have a lot of HR tools that we can use at our disposal. HR systems are even better these days. They can show us different trends. For example, kapag ka ba may hinahire tayo above market rate, ang binabayad natin sa kanila is above market rate, do they tend to stay longer? Can we retain them better compared to applicants or new employees that we take at market rate or at just the average? These are different data points that we can gather from the systems that are currently available in the market. Kaya lalo pang mas may expectation sa HR na maging marunong sa mga ganitong kind of data processing. And then of course, to be a trusted partner means we have a process-based way of interacting with our clients and managing expectations. Kapag mas naiintindihan ng leaders kung paano sila makikipag-work with us, mas professional yung dating. Mas meron tayong credibility dahil nakikita nila na maayos yung pag-consult natin with them. Later on, I'm going to walk you through a possible process of internal consulting. And it's also a process of consulting that I apply with my own clients as well as an external consultant. Before we move into that slide, again, these 6 points, think about them as the different conditions that you will have to build to really become a trusted partner for your leaders in the organization. So ano ang example ng isang process na pwede natin gamitin para maging maayos yung pagiging internal consultants natin? This is the internal consulting process as described by Peter Block in Flawless Consulting. This is also the external consulting process that he uses. So makikita natin na pareho lang sila, iba lang yung tao na gumagawa ng consulting, di ba? Because external versus internal consultant. The first phase of that process is entry and contracting. This is where you begin to uncover the needs and the wants of that client. This is when you determine your objective and your role as an internal consultant. Ang pinaka-importante sa part na to is to understand kung ano ba yung outcome na gusto makita ng client and what is expected of the internal consultant when it comes to delivering that outcome. You have to be very clear in this stage. If you're not clear about the outcome, then it will be hard to measure if you were successful in the change or not. As an external consultant, what I usually do with my potential clients is we have an introductory call. In that introductory call, that's when I try to find out more about what are the needs and wants they are looking for. From there, I create a proposal with a list of what I can deliver on as a consultant if they were to work with me. And then, of course, when we decide to work together, we have a contract, a very clear contract that states what the deliverables are, what is the outcome that's expected to happen, and what is my role that I can bring to the table as the consultant. Bakit kailangan yung entry and contracting? Kahit na magka-work naman kayo, pareho kayong empleyado ng organization. Kailangan pa rin yun because number one, it helps set expectations between the two of you. Mas maganda kung pareho kayong sigurado as to what it is that you will have to do. Number two, it actually creates a sense of professionalism. Kapag meron kayong contract on what needs to happen, mas nagiging aware din yung client or yung leader na yun kung ano ba yung kailangan nilang gawin and ano yung support na kailangan nila ibigay to get to the desired outcome. That sense of professionalizing things can help build the influence that you're looking for moving forward. All right? So that's the first phase. It's entry and contracting. The next phase is discovery and dialogue. Once you're sure that you're going to work together and there's a contract that you have set in place, now it's time to gather your data. Discovery and dialogue is about gathering as much useful information as possible so that you can make accurate decisions in the future. There are many different ways of gathering information. You could think about it as number one, quantitative data. Quantitative data meaning may numbers, pwedeng survey, for example, pwede ring existing data from your HR systems that you already have. For example, number of employees, kung ilang taon na sila nagtatrabaho for your company, ilang kumpanya na ba ang pinanggalingan nila? Yun ang mga kinds of quantitative data that you can put in a numeric sense. Another kind of data that you can get during discovery would be qualitative. These are the kinds of data that you gather from actually talking to people. It could be like through interviews or focus group discussions where you have an opportunity to probe into the answers that they will give you. So again, importante na meron tayong discovery and dialogue phase. The issue here is a lot of leaders don't actually understand the value of data gathering. Minsan, ang nanonotice ko ay, ang akala nila, okay na yon kapag sinabi nila kung ano yung problema. Akala nila, pag nakwento nila yung concern sa consultant, pwede nang mag-jump into solution. I would highly encourage you to help shift that mindset of the leaders that you're working with. Really help them understand that to identify what the problem is, you have to know kung ano ba talaga yung nasa isip and even nasa puso ng mga employees ninyo. The only way to understand where your employees are coming from is to spend time in the discovery and dialogue phase of the internal consulting process. The third phase is feedback and the decision to act. This is where you give feedback on the conclusions from the data that you've gathered. Ito na yung insights. Ang data, useless yan kung hindi natin matuturn into actionable insights. So in phase 3, we have those actionable insights that the organization can use in a meaningful way. Once you have those recommendations, also under phase 3 is a decision to act. Kailangan makuha natin yung go or no-go. Okay ba sa mga leaders? Bibigyan ba tayo ng budget and ng resource to make these recommendations happen? So that's when the decision to act comes in. The decision to act would also have to involve all of the people who will be stakeholders of whatever that recommendation may be. Kailangan may buy-in tayo ng mga tao na maaapektuhan ng mga insights na nire-recommend natin. And then next, phase 4 is engagement and implementation. This is where we do the actual execution of the plan. Ito na yung may actions tayo na ginagawa on the ground. And then last, phase 5 is extension, recycle, or termination. Once we deliver on the specific actions we want to implement, we have to be able to track it against the outcomes that we've set in the contracting phase. Tatanungin natin, na-achieve ba natin yung mga sinabi natin sa phase 1 na gusto natin mangyari? If yes, we've achieved it, then maybe we can terminate the project. Tapos na siya. Tapos na yung phase na yun. If, for example, we find that we did not exactly get the outcome we intended, maybe the project can extend. For example, siguro based on your data that you've gathered, it seems like kulang yung time for implementation to actually see changes. Then you could agree with the client to extend the project. Pwede rin naman na based on the data that you've gathered and the implementation, it may look like the original outcomes you intended are actually not the correct outcomes. Baka may iba palang problema na dapat i-address. So then, you can recycle the data that you've gathered, but start a whole new process with a different set of expectations. And then of course, if hindi talaga nakuha yung outcome na gusto ninyo, you can also decide to terminate and say, maybe we are not the right partners for this project, and there are other people with the right set of skills that will benefit the project. So these are the 5 phases of internal consulting. It's important that we have steps, exact steps. Again, we want to build credibility with our leaders. We can do that when we show that we work in a systematic and process-filled way. So now, we have to understand that a clear process will allow you to diagnose the real issues before jumping into action. Ang problema is, when, for example, we are HR people na hindi pa masyadong may influence with our leaders, what happens is they give us a task. So maybe we are in the entry and contracting phase, but nagja-jump kaagad tayo sa implementation. Kasi nga, tempted tayo to take action immediately. What I encourage you to do is to not do that. Take the time and help your leaders see that it's useful to take some time to actually go through the process. Kapag nag-go through tayo sa process, mas naiintindihan natin kung ano ba yung totoong problema, and we are more likely to put our eggs in that basket na mas sure na tayong tama yung problema ina-address natin. So again, please try to engage in a clear process to allow you to diagnose the real issues before jumping into action. So now, we have to ask ourselves, anong pwede natin gawin para unti-unti we can start building that internal consulting skill? These are some of the things that we can look at. First, listen. Hindi na to bago for HR, di ba? Nakikinig naman tayo at tayo yung pinapagsabihan ng halos lahat ng concern ng mga tao in the organization. But what I encourage you to do is to really listen for possible organizational concerns that you hear. Even if, let's say, for example, it's just one employee, one staff member telling you a story about their experience in the office. As you listen, try to diagnose, ano ba pwedeng sinasabi ng experience na to na kinikwento sa akin tungkol sa kumpanya namin? If this person is upset about their manager, maybe you can ask yourself, do we have a wider manager problem here? Or siya lang ba yung may frustrations sa manager niya? Train ba natin yung managers natin to be good managers who can handle people and develop people? Baka naman may problema talaga. So listen intently for those kinds of issues that you can bring to the organizational level. Hindi lang yung problema ng isang tao na yun ang gusto natin i-address. We want to be able to ultimately change the organization as a whole. Number 2, part of changing that organization as a whole is to understand the puzzle and the puzzle pieces, how they work together. Kailangan nakikita natin yung buong picture at yung different aspects ng sistema na yun. The more we understand that, their alignments and their integrations, then the more we can provide solutions that will be holistic and beneficial for the company. 3, we have to do what we commit to do. At the end of the day, lahat kayo, sinabi nyo na kailangan magkaroon tayo ng influence with our leaders. The best way to create influence is to show that you're actually having those wins. The best way is to show that you follow through and do what you say you will do. Kaya naman, one of the biggest things we can start doing now to become internal consultants is to do what we've committed. These are the three things that I hope you can immediately apply kahit mamayang hapon as you go back to your HR work after our webinar. And with that, everyone, that's actually the end of our session. Later on, let's go through the top takeaways, but start thinking about what are some of the top takeaways that you will leave the session with. We started by just defining consulting. We said that anyone, even if your role is not a consultant, you could be applying a consulting skill. Lalo na kung HR ka. We can think of HR people as internal consultants. Why that's important is because to build up to a level 4 of maturity where HR is more problem-oriented and systemic, we have to be able to operate like a consulting firm. And to do that, we need to have internal consulting skills. We talked about the objective of being an internal consultant, which is to become a trusted partner. We also said that there are 6 different conditions you must fulfill to become a trusted partner of the different leaders in your organization. Part of those 6 points is to have a specific and clear process in the way that you work. That's why we looked at the 5 phases of internal consulting. And then, of course, to wrap up and leave you with some actionable tips, we looked at the things you can do now to immediately start building your internal consulting skill. Now, everyone, what is your top takeaway from our session today? In one word or one phrase, maybe you can share that in the chat box. Yeah, so someone said, it is tough to do consulting and it takes a lot to be an effective one. That is so true because it takes a lot of practice. Even just the art of asking questions and knowing what kinds of questions to ask that will lead to good, insightful data, that takes a lot of practice. Kailangan paulit-ulit siya na ginagawa. Doing what you commit to do, yes, it takes diligence and accountability to be a trusted partner. Yeah, I love this next one. You can actually become internal consultants. Yes, I hope that after our session today, that's something you can really believe in. That's great to see you're starting to see that. Yup. I love that your takeaway is to make a change. I think it's important to be motivated to have that impact. It's time to level up HR. Yes. It's more than a transactional job, di ba? Siguro dati, nung nagsimula pa lang yung HR, many years ago, it was more transactional. But now, as organizations are realizing that it's actually their people resource that's the most important resource in their organizations, kailangan binavalue natin yung mga tao na yun. So, sino ba yung katulong nila para mag-value ng people? That's HR. So then we have to be treated as actual strategic business partners. All right? We should aim to become systemic and problem-oriented, yes? Yeah, in reality, we're all-arounders, di ba? Minsan kahit host ng party, HR din yun. But kidding aside, we can think about being an internal consultant as someone who can see the totality. So that means pretty much all around, we have some knowledge of what's happening in the company. And then the last comment we have there is yes, engagement and trust is a two-way process. Very true. Last comment I see here is knowing the business well can help establish trust. Exactly. Business acumen is actually very important. That's why these days you can see that in the Fortune 500 companies, for example, maraming HR heads na ang background nila is they've had experience in operations. That's because having that experience heavily leads them to gain the business acumen they need to operationalize the HR function, HR processes na hindi kasing eksakto ng mga mas maybe logistics side of the operations. Ayan. All right. So key takeaways to start wrapping up. Number 1, HR must work to become a trusted partner of the organization's leaders and people. At the end of the day, what I hope you can really keep in mind is this idea of becoming a trusted partner. Ito yung paraan para unti-unti maging mas pinapaniwalaan at mas kinoconsult tayo ng mga tao sa organizations natin. Next, key takeaway is we must develop the HR capability of our organizations to enable a consulting-like approach. Kailangan ma-recognize muna natin kung nasaan na tayo ngayon. Maybe your HR department is still more on the traditional transactional side. That's okay, right? That's where you are in your journey. So then once you realize that, you can start finding ways to bring you up to the higher levels of the maturity model. We all start somewhere naman, diba? So ideally, once you know where you are, you can continue building up. So everyone, thank you so much for learning with us this April. I hope it gives you a bit more of a better idea of how consultants work and how you yourselves can be internal consultants. My other hope is that in the future, let's say if you're going to hire an external consultant, kapag mas alam nyo yung proseso, mas maganda yung magiging trabaho nyo with them. Because you're also expecting that clear process from them. And with that, let's talk about what's next. Let me give you the reminders for the session. Please connect with me, connect with us at Elisha Corpus Consulting. I'm going to leave my Facebook page link and LinkedIn page link there in the chat. I'd love to be connected with you, so please do follow and like our page. Next up, for certificates. So for certificates, please answer the evaluation form that I linked in the chat. It's bit.ly-eval/int consulting. Para mas madali, huwag nyo na i-type, i-click nyo na lang yung link in the chat. Okay, again, the link is in the chat. Please be reminded that the form will only be open for 2 hours. If it's, we end at 11:30, so the form will close at around 1:30. So again, please remember that certificates will be given within 1 week. So expect that by Thursday next week. If you ask us through email before Thursday, we probably won't be able to reply. So again, please just note that e-certificates will be given within 1 week. We only give certificates to those who answer. Kaya very, very important that you answer that. Kahit na nandito kayo sa Zoom, if hindi nyo sagutan, hindi namin malalaman yung pangalan nyo for the certificate. And then, of course, please join us in future webinars. I'd love to see you in the next month webinar and in the future months webinars. We try to do at least one every month, and we focus on a specific HR skill that we will all need to do to level up. Or if you'd like to work with me as an external consultant of your organizations, please book an intro call with us to learn more about how we can partner together. The intro call is free, and this is also something that we do so we can understand your needs and wants before doing a proposal. So that's it, everyone. Again, I am pasting the link in the chat. Do not forget to answer that form. And here's what we do. If you do not have any more questions, please feel free to leave the call. Happy lunch, everyone. Sana lumamig ng konti yung panahon today para lumamig din ng konti yung mga ulo natin. But I do hope that you have an enjoyable rest of your day. If you have any questions, we can take those questions now. Just type them in the chat and I'll read them out loud. All right. So for those who are already leaving, goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy. Malapit na mag-Friday.
Thank you po.
Bye. All right. So let me just stop the recording there. Hold on.